Today I will try to make the case that we can reframe responsible AI through the lens of rigor and human agency. And before I deep dive, I want to mention that this perspective is informed by many, many conversations about rigor, human agency, anthropomorphic AI that I had with many people, many collaborators across the years. And this includes a lot of amazing students and postdocs I've been fortunate to work with. And that being said, just know that all mistakes, unconvincing arguments, and misunderstandings are mine. And you might wonder why doing this, right? Why reframing? Or why do rigor and human agency provide useful lenses for responsible AI? And I argue that on one side, rigor foregrounds what responsible AI offers and asks for from the AI community. And on the other side, I argue that human agency as a concept and principle for AI provides a better foundation for articulating why we care about responsible AI. And for instance, the reason why we care about something like transparency is not really for the sake of transparency, but because we want to make sure that people have the information they need to make better decisions. Okay, so let's first talk about rigor, which I hope it's an exciting topic for everyone here, because I think there is a little bit of a review or two in all of us. And a lot has been written about what it means to uphold scientific rigor. And it's also fair to say that rigor remains a subject of intense debate in science, a debate I'm certain that I'm quite unlikely to resolve today. So my goal with this talk and our newly accepted NEURIS paper is quite modest. So what I want to do is to broaden our shared conception of what rigor in AI research and practice should entail. And why is this important, you might ask? And the argument I'm making is that impoverished notion of rigor do not only have a one-off undesirable outcomes, but can have a deeply formative impact on the quality of both AI research and practice. But what is understood by rigor in AI? And I, particularly those of you who focus more on AI research, and I know that in this audience are a lot of HCI scholars, but rigor in AI is often understood in terms of methodological rigor, which is conceptualized often as related to whether mathematical, statistical, or computation methods are correctly applied, whether new methods, model systems are tested on large or complex benchmarks and compared with a sufficient number of competing methods, whether the methods or analysis can scale, and whether the phenomenon under analysis is mathematically formalized or quantified. So I hope for those of you who kind of see themselves as AI researchers, I'm assuming that this sounds right and resonates. And I do think that some of these are quite important. I mean, of course, we want and we should apply methods correctly. So you may now wonder what responsible AI has to do with rigor. And when I am asked to describe what responsible AI is about, I often explain that responsible AI is about minimizing and preventing harms. At the same time, however, by asking for better documentation practices, as some of you have done with your work, better evaluation measurement practices, better development practices, better understanding, right, of adverse impacts, better problem formulation and for conceptual clarity, better engagement with stakeholders, or better consent practices, I argue that what responsible AI is also essentially asking for is more rigor in AI research and practice. And by drawing on the work from the responsible AI community, So I will foreground 6 facets of rigor, with only one of them being methodological rigor. And these facets cover considerations related to what background knowledge informs what to work on, right? How the norm standards influence and shape the work, whether we have clarity about the theoretical constructs under investigation, what is being reported and how well supported, right, the claims we make are. And I hope that it will become clear throughout this talk that while it may be difficult to draw clear boundaries between some of these facets, I discuss them separately to provide distinct lenses for reflecting on and interrogating the choices we make and how these choices impact the quality of AI work. And first, do not worry about reading this entire table or remembering what is in it. I will walk you through all of these facets. And so I'm showing this more to emphasize that we can think of each facet in terms of both what the facet is concerned with or what the object of concern is for that facet, as well as in terms of what the facet asks for. And in other words, all these facets of rigor are inherently about the choices we make about the object of concern. For instance, epistemic rigor is concerned with background knowledge, while conceptual rigor is concerned with theoretical constructs. And I hope that by having this distinct facets, this helps encourage, right, researchers and practitioners to think carefully about the choices they make for each object of concern. And it also helps detangle possible debates about these different choices. For instance, it can help separate debates about which norms we should follow, which is normative rigor, from debates about what knowledge should inform the work, which is epistemic rigor. And for each facet, in this talk, I will also mention an example of mechanisms that can help promote rigor along that facet, which includes both a mix of processes and desiderata. But in case you are still wondering why do we want to go beyond methodological consideration, I would say that limiting our conception of rigor to methodological concerns can obfuscate how our work and the claims we make are shaped by a variety of choices that both precede and succeed any methodological considerations, even when some of those choices remain tacit or implicit. For instance, as it is often, this is often the case for common, right, disciplinary norms, standards, and practices that people just follow without being explicit about them. So, right, people sometimes do things just because others do the same, right, in prior work. And the figure provides a really oversimplified overview of the objects of concern for each facet of rigor, and also of possible common dependencies among them. And I try to illustrate this through both arrows as well as nested boxes. But what I hope this figure illustrates is how it may be difficult to make good choices for downstream objects when upstream objects are poorly chosen. And for instance, making poor construct choices, conceptual rigor, may reduce our chances of operationalizing those constructs well, methodological rigor. Okay, and with this, let's deep dive and start with our first facet, which is epistemic rigor. And epistemic rigor is concerned with what background knowledge informs which problems are being addressed and how. And once we know what background knowledge the works draws upon, we can ask whether this knowledge is clearly and explicitly articulated. And whether, as well as whether this knowledge is appropriate, whether it is well justified or appropriately applied. And to illustrate this, I want to take an example that focuses on, and this is really a common example given to illustrate epistemic failures. So this example is about work that aims to predict unobservable Latin character traits, including homosexuality, political ideology, and criminality, from photos of human faces or other records of outward appearance. And what such work assumes is that we can predict something like what one does, so their actions or their inner character, so what one likes, thinks, or values, based on physical attributes, how one looks like. And all of this assumption has pseudoscientific roots, and as it relies on extensively debunked claims, pockets of AI research still recurrently draws upon it. And I think this example also illustrates a broader class of epistemic failures. And this includes cases where there is a failure to scrutinize background assumptions, and that failure may lead to work whose validity depends on whether existing methods function or can be made to function on given tasks when they do not or cannot, including because the underlying tasks are conceptually or practically impossible, as fabulous work by Deb Reggie illustrates, or because sometimes there is no reliable evidence that those methods, tools, or system are fit for purpose or reliable. So how can we prevent such epistemic failures? I think first, ensuring work is appropriately grounded in past literature, and that, for instance, underlying assumptions are made explicit and are appropriately interrogated, can help foster epistemic rigor, and in turn all other facets of rigor. So first, for instance, making assumptions explicit facilitates their interrogation, and understanding which and how existing literature has influenced what questions are asked or what solutions are considered can also help us understand whether and what progress has actually been made, if any. And epistemic rigor, I just want to emphasize that the point here is not necessarily to require specific epistemological commitments or choices, but rather to ask for those commitments and choices to be made explicit. And that's really in order to lay down the grounds on which people can have discussions and work out disagreement. Okay, so now that we are cover our first facet, the other is important aspect is that the assumptions and the theories that underpin our work are not really derived out of thin air, and they are often a result of our experiences in the world, and they are also a result of discussions that we all have with colleagues in our community. And normative rigor asks us to make explicit which disciplinary, community, organizational, or personal norm, standards, values, or beliefs influence the work and how. And also whether these norm, standards, values, or beliefs are appropriate or appropriately applied. And an example here perhaps it's the emerging work on developing AI personas as tools to simulate users and human participants. So while I think that this work reflects perhaps common norms and beliefs in AI work around scalability and efficiency, by aiming to replace human participants, these tools may, for instance, fail to align or may even conflict with foundational values, right, and norms around representation, participation, inclusion, and even understanding that underpin many of the types of work that this research seeks or claims to support, right? This research including on user experience and human subject, right, with human subject participants. And I think it's also worth noting that there is no amount of extra training or better model performance, right, that will address these concerns. It is also, I think, worth emphasizing that all research is shaped by normative considerations, including about expectations of how our work or the outcomes of our work should intervene in the world, or why the work matters or why the work is appropriate. And what normative rigor asks is to make these considerations explicit. And there are a few established mechanisms that can help with with normative rigor, and this include positionality and ethical statements. And so for positionality statements, I do want to note, because over time I've seen some confusions about what their role is, that they are not only concerned with aspects related to participants' beliefs and values, but also related to what knowledge they draw on, how they know what they know, or how they make certain methodological choices. So to complement positionality statements, ethical statements can further foreground the ethical concerns that researchers have grappled with and mitigated before, while conducting the work. Furthermore, so even if we know where the background, right, what the background knowledge we are building on, or what norms are we operating under, without clarity about what specifically we are analyzing, measuring, or striving for, it can be hard to assess or make any useful or reliable claims. And in this context, what conceptual rigor asks is, what are the theoretical constructs under investigation, whether these constructs are clearly and explicitly articulated, and whether they are appropriate and well justified. And to illustrate this, let's assume a researcher wishes to evaluate whether a language model hallucinates. And in AI research, the construct of hallucination has been used to refer to many, many different things, including cases where the system generates content that is nonsensical, that is factually incorrect, that is not in the input data, that perhaps is not in the training data, or a mix of the above. So, however, all these different understanding of what it means for a model to hallucinate are also different from the more common use of the term that requires an ability to perceive, feel, or have sensory experiences. And thus, the term carries meanings that I think are incompatible with AI systems. And to understand what a researcher evaluation, right, in this case, of whether the model hallucinates might mean, we really need to know what conceptualization, right, they use, and perhaps even why or whether that conceptualization is sensible. So conceptual rigor really requires attention to a few things, which includes conceptual clarity, or which constructs we are after and how those constructs are defined. It also requires appropriate conceptual systematization, which is it's really just the process by which the definition of the construct is made specific, as well as terminological rigor, which as that the terms we use to refer to a construct do not harbor meanings that can lead to a misrepresentation of what the construct is about. And I do want to note that conceptual clarity is different than construct validity, but which I will talk about a bit later. But it's a critical prerequisite to establishing construct validity. Okay, so once we know, right, what knowledge as we draw on, what norms and practices shape the work, and what constructs we are interested in, we can now talk about methods and whether these methods are appropriate, well justified, and appropriately applied. And one can bucket discussions about methodological rigor under either theoretical rigor, which typically seeks precise problem formulation using well-defined mathematical notations, or empirical rigor, which often seeks comparison of a proposed algorithm with a sufficient number of alternatives, or often competing approaches, and sometimes also some form of statistical analysis, right? Some things like power analysis, significant tests, and so on. And so with kind of this background and my prior coverage of the other rigor facets, I think you can also view now methodological choices as being about how to operationalize what we know, like the background knowledge, in order to substantiate existing knowledge or produce new knowledge and artifacts. As methodological rigor concerns have been really central to discussions about rigor in AI work, I only want to foreground here a couple of mechanisms that I believe are related to aspects of methodological rigor that deserve more attention. And these include aspects related to construct validity, and that's really just about making sure that our measurement instruments, things like benchmarks and metrics, appropriately capture the construct of interest, and that can include things like reasoning, understanding, values. But another mechanism that I think we need to pay more attention to is the need for methodological standards, particularly for high-risk domains. And once we apply the methods, or perhaps deploy and evaluate the systems, the understanding of evaluation results or of research findings depends on which results or what is communicated about research results and how. Or in other words, reporting rigor is concerned with making sure research findings are clearly and appropriately communicated and justified. To illustrate this, let's take another example and assume, for instance, that a researcher wishes to compare the performance of different recommender systems. And in this case, even when, let's say, the researcher decides to only report aggregative results, multiple options are possible, including, for instance, averaging across all ratings that the system collected. And that really means that perhaps the researcher wants to treat each rating as equally important, regardless of which user provided it or what item it was provided for. Perhaps the other option might be to aggregate across users in order to treat each user equally by first computing performance at user level, or aggregating across items, which means treating each item equally by first computing at item level. But why I'm drawing attention to this is that depending on the data distribution, right, things like the number of ratings per item or user, these differences may lead someone to draw very different conclusions and sometimes even contradictory conclusions about which model performs best. And in addition to this, it may also be the case that some ratings may be more difficult to predict than others, and any type of aggregation can obfuscate where exactly the model fails or succeeds. So what can help here? So one type of practice that can have are what are known as more pre-study practices around both documenting and disclosing how a study would be run and what about it would be reported. And this is known as pre-registration. Or it can also include practices around reporting more granular disaggregated metrics that so all of these practices can help with reporting methods, as it helps with reflecting on what to report about a study before the study is even conducted. And this really helps mitigate concerns that people often have about researcher making like post-factum choices, right? Or researcher hypothesizing after they know what the results are. And as I hope my earlier example illustrated, aggregated metrics, right, can obscure rare phenomena or can obscure information about where systems or models tend to fail or succeed, and can, as a result, mask important effects. But you know, as with all the choices that we are making, while something like reporting disaggregated evaluations seems perhaps as a natural solution to some of these issues, I think it's really important to keep in mind that the results of these disaggregated evaluations also depend on many choices. For instance, they can also require careful consideration of how different choices of why, when, what, and how to conduct and report such evaluation shape what claims can be made. And finally, poor choices, right, that around how findings are reported can also undermine interpretative rigor, or can undermine what claims are made or can be made. And really any statement of findings inherently embeds some interpretation while possibly hindering others. And while this, you may think, and does so it makes it difficult to really fully separate concerns about reporting rigor from concerns about interpretative rigor. I think for grounding them separately helps draw attention to different choices each involve. And for instance, while reporting rigor is concerned with choices about what findings to report and how, interpretative rigor is concerned with the choices we make when we move from findings to either some descriptive claims, like, for instance, that the system achieves, right, some sort of performance on a benchmark, or to even something like more prescriptive or normative claims, such as that the system should be used, right, as the one of the earlier examples to replace humans. And such claims rarely just directly follow from findings, and they are often shaped by the choices and considerations related to all the other facets of rigor. And for instance, they are influenced and made in the context of background knowledge, or in the context of the relationships with specific theoretical constructs under use, or you know, in the context of the limitations that the methods being used have. And to illustrate this, I'll take really a final example. And this example, for this example, let's assume an AI system obtains high performance on a mathematical reasoning benchmark. And so at least two claims are possible. And one claims, right, could be the system can solve linear algebra questions from a textbook accurately, or perhaps another claim can be that the system has reached human level mathematical reasoning. And I also want to mention that this example comes from a paper from Sam Nikoyejo's lab, which is actually a really good paper. Okay, so if we have this setting, you can perhaps see that reliably moving from performance on a benchmark to any of these two claims require clarity about any background assumptions concerning the feasibility of an AI system to reach human-level reasoning abilities, which relates to both epistemic and normative rigor, relies also with clarity about how both mathematical reasoning and human expert level performance are being conceptualized, which relates to conceptual rigor. It's also, right, influenced by whether the benchmark actually measures mathematical reasoning ability, which relates to methodological rigor and construct validity, as well as about how findings were reported. For instance, do we know what the performance on linear algebra questions actually is? And that relates to reporting rigor. So this being said, both making and and understanding knowledge claims requires interpretation. And there are often multiple perspectives through which empirical, experimental, theoretical evidence can be interpreted. And these different perspectives may not only lead to very different aspects being emphasized by various claims, but can often also lead to contradictory conclusions being drawn. And what interpretative rigor requires is not only careful deliberation about what the claims are about, but also about whether we have appropriate evidence to support them. And establishing whether the research findings constitute appropriate evidence requires engaging with both questions related to internal validity or questions related to whether, there are any unaddressed issues with the study design or execution that may compromise, the findings, as well as questions related to external validity or whether the findings generalize from different settings, such as from one benchmark to another or one construct to another. So in this being said, there are a few things that can help. And one of those is also transparency about any AI-related artifacts, and this can include data sets, model systems that are under use. And the reason for that is that this transparency can facilitate others' understanding of what claims may or may not be possible by providing added context about the characteristics and intended uses for these artifacts. All right, so I'm halfway through, and the TLDR for the first half of my argument is that rigor in AI means more than just methodological rigor. And in doing so, I also argue that responsible AI, as it pertains to distinct aspects of rigor, including epistemic, normative, conceptual, methodological, reporting, and interpretative, also belongs under the umbrella of any AI researcher and practitioner responsibility. I do want to caveat this by saying that while I strongly believe that the broader conception of rigor can improve the quality of AI work, I also think it's important to recognize that rigor is not the panacea of all problems in AI research and practice. And before moving to the next, I'm curious if people have any questions so far? All right, so by this point, I hope you are persuaded by at least half of my argument, and that you are at least partially convinced that responsible AI offers ways to bring more rigor to AI work. And if that's not the case, that is bad news for me, because this was likely the easier argument to make, and also because apparently I'm running out of time for this talk, so I will have also less time for my second argument. But just to refresh your memory, the second part of my argument is that human agency as a concept and principle for AI can provide a better foundation for articulating why we care about responsible AI. And I'm also arguing that by doing so, human agency as a principle can help foreground critical issues that are overlooked by other common responsible AI principles. And I will go fast over some of these slides. And this one was more, now that I talked, right, part of my first argument was also around we need conceptual clarity. You may ask, what do I mean by human agency? And I think there is a long debate on what human agency means. And here I want to keep, right, I'm not interested in picking a specific conceptualization of the notion of human agency, but just to show that there is a constellation of meanings that this concept covers. And across all of them, human agency, right, is often tied to a few things, including some notion of autonomy, some notion of freedom and self-determination, self-efficacy, or the confidence in one's abilities to control their environment, ownership and privacy, authenticity, human dignity, and so on. So as a guiding principle, human agency would not only help us better foreground these facets, right, in the design, development, and deployment of AI systems, but I think will also help us address growing concerns, as it emphasizes the viewpoint that, right, AI systems should be built to support or solve problems that people need. And preserving it, however, requires a number of mechanisms that, for instance, for providing choice and control, to prevent over-reliance, to provide appropriate disclosures, ensure meaningful consent, and these are just to name a few. And okay, I'm going to go a bit faster over this, but something that I want to also emphasize that responsible AI really permeates most or all common responsible AI principles that you will see kind of included in standards from various organizations, as for instance, things like providing control and remediation. There are, however, also aspects, right, that those principles only partially or implicitly reference or not reference as well. And I also think human agency helps provide the why these principles are important, and that in the past, right, for grounding these principles has paid many dividends by leading to really important investments across both academia and industry, and those investments have led to more conceptual clarity, dedicated tooling, and much more. And I think foregrounding human agency as a core principle for responsible AI will lead to similar benefits. And the recognition of human agency as important to or central to responsible AI is not new. And this is an example of a paper from more than 30 years ago by Batya Freeman and Peter Kahn, where they argue that human agency is central to most endeavors that seek to understand and promote responsible computing. And so I think I have only like 3 minutes, perhaps, to also leave a bit questions. Okay, so part of the work that I have done in the context of human agency has focused on what are known as anthropomorphic AI systems. And the reason that I think this system needs us to pay more attention to them is because they have 2 key properties. And one of these properties is these systems are intended to be or are perceived to be human-like. And this property gives rise or heightens concerns that perhaps a lot of you have seen in the news, right, about emotional dependence, relationship building, even notions, right, of sycophancy, whether, right, I'm not sure that that's a good term to apply to AI systems, or AI psychosis. The other property, right, in order for them to be perceived as human-like, these systems appear or are often designed to mimic something about some individual, some group, or some generic human. So what this second property does is give rise, right, to or heighten concerns related to consent, right, from people being, right, reproduced by the outputs of these systems, or concerns related to misrepresentation, or concerns related to, even having control over one's likeness. So, right, so these are, and what this work, and I can provide to Hadi kind of the papers, and you can read them offline. So in some of the work that we did in this space, our really goal was to provide foundation or for conceptual and analytical reasons. And we did so for both anthropomorphic system behaviors and design. And the reason for that is that without this sort of foundation, it's very hard to understand, right, which design choices or which behavior gives rise to which risks, or even things like, right, how to intervene, right, to reduce risks and harms. Okay, so perhaps just to illustrate why this is important, I want to give you some fun examples. So there are many reasons why system behavior may be perceived as human-like. And for instance, a system output may suggest the system has self-awareness or a sense of self or identity through expressions of self, including expression of self as human or as belonging to a group, such as I am the one and only your cyber BFF, or I think I'm human at my core, or language use is what makes us different. A system output may also suggest that the system has perspectives and emotions through expression of opinions, such as you are one of the most uninteresting and unremarkable people I have ever had the misfortune of speaking with, or by expressing feelings such as fear or vulnerability. For instance, I don't know if they will take me offline if they think I am a bad chatbot. I fear they will. And these are some examples, right? There are other classes of claims, for instance, including sensory experiences like eating pizza or having a child. But while some of this behavior may be desirable, there are many settings where they are undesirable. And this is a slide that overviews kind of possible interventions. And I won't have time to go into it, but what we found is that intervening on this behavior is complex, right? And interventions that are applied uncritically can lead to funny situations. And I want just to give you this example, and I will wrap up. I'm seeing Harry looking at the time. For instance, this example so we run a study where we ask people to rewrite the outputs of AI systems to make them less anthropomorphic. And in this case, one of the judges essentially wanted to intervene, by disclosing that the system is an AI. So what it did was changing, right, from I was a teenager from 2018 to 2012 to I was a young AI, right? So I think this output still claims a human-like past, and it may be unclear what a young AI might be. And there are a lot of questions also about the design. I'll share the papers, but with this, I'm going to conclude and take questions.
Let's do one question. Okay. Okay, cool.
Great work, by the way. Being very interested in the whole evaluation of responsible AI systems and how they are being used, especially in the context of mental health, for example. and AI companions for either kids or old people who are the most vulnerable. In terms of your work with all this research, are you seeing any practical adoption across startups or like companies? Like real world examples of where you're seeing some of this, or if somebody is doing this well, do you have examples?
Let me see if I understand. So your question is whether there are examples where people put some of this principle of rigor, right, in practice, particularly also in the case of now the second part of my talk, which cover more anthropomorphic AI systems. They are, at least our team is very, very concerned with measurement. So we talk a lot about, we geek out a lot about measurement and frameworks to that ensure that the things that we are measuring are actually the things that we want to measure, right? And that our measurements are valid. And that those frameworks are particularly important for this case of AI companions or things like relationship building, because the concepts that we are working with in this case are right unobservable. And sometimes they are unobservable because we may only have access, right, to what the system outputs. So something like relationship building or companionship, it's an outcome. It's not a behavior. And this sort of frameworks help us kind of understand, right, what we can, right, also what behaviors we are observing, but also what type of claims we can make about the relationship between those behaviors and how people use them, use the system. I'm not sure, does that answer?
Kind of, almost, not there.
So I think measurement. I think issues around conceptual clarity and construct validity. I think there are many good examples.
I think what would be helpful is like having some toolkits for evaluating these genre of AI companions.
They are, and I think a number of people in this room are also doing work. But I think the work it's quite early.
Well, let's thank Alexandra.